And we're back. You're listening to the Talking Boxing with Billy C show. Glad you could join us. It's all being made possible by Sal's Neighborhood Pizzeria. Check it out, www.salsneighborhoodpizzeria.com. I want to give a shout out to all the Fox Sports radio listeners on WMML 1230 that's listening to us right now. And speaking of now, it's time for the
Blast from the Past.
We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Top-ranking heavyweight. Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time.
Look at that left hook. Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
And this week's Blast from the Past is being sponsored by the International Boxing Organization, where their computerized ranking system is second to none. Check it out, www.iboboxing.com. And this week, we're talking about former world light heavyweight champion Marvin Johnson. And joining me right now to tell us all about Marvin Johnson is Alex Papali. What's up, brother?
Hey, Billy. I'm sorry there if I had my sound up. I didn't need to hit the mute button in time.
No, you looked. It was fine with me. I didn't put you live until it was your time. It's like a fine wine. You don't get your button pressed until it's your turn, Alex. Come on, man. So tell us about Marvin Johnson.
Marvin Johnson. This guy was born April 12th, 1954, in Indianapolis, Indiana. He was 6 feet tall, and he boxed at light heavyweight. He was a really good amateur and went to the 1972 Olympics, and those were the Olympics where Palestinian terrorists took the Israeli, forget what team it was, but they took them hostages. I think it was the Israeli team. I guess it was multiple the sports. It wasn't just like one sport. People were killed and stuff, but I guess the Olympic Games still went on, and he did end up winning a bronze medal in those Olympics. He was disappointed because the guy who ended up winning, Vyacheslav Lemeshev, the Soviet, Johnson had beaten in earlier international competition about 6 months prior. So he felt like, if he only he just came up short, in that gold medal round there, and ended up coming away with the bronze. And he did go pro, and that was one of the things that there was never any doubt that he was going to go pro. He said that you can't eat no trophies.
There was a mentality before you came on. I was saying, all these guys looked alike, but they all acted alike too. They all just seemed like so tough. You look at Marvin Johnson, and there was other fighters too that kind of looked the same. Matthew Saad Muhammad looked the same. Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, I should say. Also, these guys kind of all looked a little like each other, I think,
There were several, at this era, light heavyweights who were all, they fought each other multiple times. A couple of them had, it's you can't help but, especially us Americans there, where you kind of lump people's names together. Matthew Franklin changed his name to Matthew Saad Muhammad. Eddie Gregory changed his name to Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, and Marvin Johnson fought both those guys. He fought Matthew Saad Muhammad twice in really good fights. There was also Victor Galendez was another guy at this time that they had tough fights with, and Marvin Johnson had a really good fight with him. And that was one of the times where he won the title. I never even checked to see I don't think he is in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He's in the World Boxing Hall of Fame. But I'm pretty sure he's one of the few people to have regained. It could have been done again since maybe in the 2000s. Maybe Roy did it, but he regained the light heavyweight title 3 times.
Well, he's the first one. He's the first one to do it.
Has somebody else done it since?
Good question.
Because this is 78 and 80. So, but these guys were all around at that time, and they had really epic fights with each other. Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, Matthew Saad Muhammad, and Marvin Johnson.
And like you mentioned, Victor Galindez, and also a guy that Marvin Johnson did not fight, who, I mean, I loved him. I know he was in jail for murder, but, Ernie Scott, he was...
James Scott.
I'm sorry, James Scott. I don't know why I said Ernie.
That was one of his regrets, actually, that he never got to fight him. I guess there's an interview on the Cyber Boxing Zone Newswire by a guy named Dan Hanley. It's a pretty good interview, and it seems like it's pretty recent. And he mentions that's one of the fights that he wishes he had fought. He was trained by a guy who was a contender in the era of Joe Louis. The guy's name was Colon Chaney. His nickname was Champ, and he started training Marvin Johnson when he was 14 at the Indianapolis PAL.
And when he was 14?
Yeah, when he was 14 years old. He lied about his age. We hear that a lot with a lot of these guys. He lied about and said he was 16 so he could get in there, and he was trained by a police officer who was named Coleon Chaney, who he had been a contender during Joe Louis's era.
His Marvin Johnson, did very well against everybody he fought, except the guys. Well, I know this is going to sound stupid, except the guys who beat him. But what I mean by that is he seemed to have a chinny chin because of his 6 losses, 5 times he was stopped, and one of those times was against Michael Spinks, which was Michael Spinks' rise to the top in the light heavyweight division before he moved up to heavyweight.
Yeah, Michael Spinks did beat him. Yeah, I think that's maybe a good thing, good way to say it, is that his chin was not always the most reliable thing, because he was winning the fight when Michael Spinks knocked him out. He did get dropped against Victor Galindez. And he was stopped against Saad Muhammad, and actually in a couple of the computer simulations I ran, he did get dropped a couple of times, and he is stopped eventually in his last fight. But he was another one of these guys who, when it was over, and he didn't come back.
Well, here's the thing. And this could be why you may be right about nobody regaining the light heavyweight championship 3 times since then. Now, obviously there's more belts now, so the odds of doing that are better. But when he first started, the Cruiserweight division wasn't around. When did the Cruiserweight division really kick into full swing? Was probably right around towards the end of Marvin Johnson's career. When he fought around with Michael Spinks, I think 1980 was the first one for the Cruiserweight. So he could have moved up, but he stayed at light heavy.
Yeah, he never did move up into the Cruiserweight division. Yeah, and I don't think it really got all that popular until probably Holyfield, which was 84.
It never got popular. That's the problem. I think it should. It's a good division. Now Leslie Stewart, who was his last fight, and like you mentioned, he wasn't able to continue after the 8th round, or actually after the 7th round. I guess is that the way it works? He stays on his stool after the 7th, and that becomes a 8th round loss.
Usually.
But Leslie Stewart eventually had moved up all the way to heavyweight, right?
I don't know if he did. He might have.
Didn't he fight Axel Schultz?
That first fight was really good, and that was one of the fights that he fought at home in Indianapolis, the first one. and when he beat Leslie Stewart, but the second one, yeah, he felt that that even in the training for that fight, he was just like, dude, I'm getting old, and so he just never had it that night.
Yeah, well, he's only 60 now. I mean, how old was he in his last fight? Let's see, he was born in 54. In 1987, that was his last fight. I mean, by today's standards, I mean, geez, B-Hop's just getting started at 50,
Yeah, this was before testosterone replacement therapy.
There you go. That's right.
But yeah, after he lost to Michael Spinks, he did mount a comeback, and it was pretty successful. I mean, he had 14 wins in a row, and he beat Prince Charles Williams. He beat Eddie Davis again in a rematch. He had beaten him once before, and that's where he ended up with the title fight with Leslie Stewart.
Yeah,
and that was a good fight, and that was one of those fights that was on regular TV. Same thing, and I think a lot of these are. I did watch the Galendez fight and some of the first Saad Muhammad fight. Most of these are on YouTube, and I will post them in social media for the show.
Yeah, well, when Marvin Johnson ended his career, like you said, after his loss to Michael Spinks, he rattles off, double-digit wins, picks up the USBA title against Eddie Davis, subsequently gets a couple of fights later, fights for the vacant WBA World Light Heavyweight title, and then realistically, his last 3 fights were all world title fights, and he just walked away.
Yeah, and I don't know if he was on, that's something I'd be curious, if he was on this year's Hall of Fame ballot, but he is somebody who I would think, we should think about getting in there because, this is the undisputed light heavyweight title that we're talking about that he had. I mean, I think that he had, like the WBA version, but the champions he beat were linear champions. So, that usually goes a long way.
Well, he beat his first one was a WBC belt, and he beat Matt Parlov, which was a good fighter back in the late 70s as well. When he retired after the Leslie Stewart fight in '87, saying he was too old, he was only 33. But it's funny how you look at not that long ago, 20 some odd years ago, and now they say heavyweight starts at 30, and they say, well, heavyweights start a little later. They make it sound like he's not even starting late, and this guy, his career was over at 33. Describe his style for anyone that hasn't seen any footage of Marvin Johnson.
This guy, I mean, he was definitely an aggressive banger. He was a southpaw, and this was, before the age of Manny Pacquiao, where southpaws have. We kind of look at southpaws a little differently now. Back then, they were, more of a cantankerous lot. You didn't want to fight southpaws. They were people that were avoided. But Marvin Johnson liked to mix it up. Like we mentioned, he could be chinny. So he was more of an action fighter. He didn't put the severe angle that some southpaws put on you, where it's just very, very difficult to hit them. You could hit him. He fought of Victor Galendez. That is one of his best fights. I'm pretty sure it was a fight of the year. It definitely had a round of the year. And the first fight with Matthew Saad Muhammad, I believe, was a fight of the year as well. He definitely had a very pleasing style. He was on free TV again, like a lot of these light heavyweights from this age. And he was just a big, strong guy who, was very physical fighters, and that led to very photogenic type fights.
Well, another interesting thing about Marvin Johnson around that Michael Spinks fight, he had fought 3 times. His third fight in 1981 was against Michael Spinks, where he was knocked out in the 4th round. He did continue his career. It's not like he had any layoffs. He fought twice in '82 and twice again in 1983. But in 1984, he really stepped it up, even by standards of yesteryear. He fought 6 times in 1984. and it earned him Ring Magazine's Comeback of the Year fighter, which was pretty cool because, like you mentioned, some of those wins were impressive. The Prince Charles Williams and the Eddie Collins wins were wins within that 6-fight span in 1984.
Yeah, definitely, and that's, like you said, it's very active. And I do think that that is something that is definitely a measure of, what makes a fighter a great, somebody you should think of as a great fighter is that they're able to redefine themselves and start over. That's one of the things that even though the Prince, I thought, was a worthy inductee this year, he didn't really have. He never, came back after his first defeat. As we look at Marvin Johnson, he had defeats, and he did return, even knockout defeats. And one of those defeats, actually, I should have mentioned. They thought he was robbed. It was a fight, I think it was in Italy, and he thought that was a fight that really helped him get a title shot because, the fight with Ladi Mawale in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. That fight, he lost an 8-round decision, and I guess a lot of people who were ringside thought he deserved the win. But the thing that he said about it was because Nate Parlov's people, I guess, saw that fight and knew that he had lost, they were willing to fight him. And he got the title shot because of that, and he ended up stopping Parlov to win the title in Chicken Marsala, Italy.
And it was a great dish, I might add. But by the way, Prince Hassim Hamed did come back, and he finished his career with a W.
He had that. He had a lot of bad timing because that fight, I believe, was Paul Engel, and it was the same day as Gotti Ward won. And nobody cared about Paul Engel. And
I think it was like it was a world title fight, but it was like the IBO title or something too, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So he got.
And didn't he hit the canvas once? He didn't look all that great.
He definitely wasn't the same fighter after the Barrera fight. I mean, whatever. But we're not talking about him today. we're talking about Marvin Johnson. But
that was one of the things, especially if you watch the Galindez fight. I mean, he like I said, a really aggressive style. He would come right at that opening bell, he'd charge right across the ring and just get right to action. So that was something that was a really likable style.
As we look back, I just want to look at this real quick before we wrap up Marvin Johnson. But as we look back in time and we do these blasts from the past, it just seems like this era. We were always talking about, the early 1900s, and the Roaring 20s, and then the 30s, and then of course the 40s, where a lot of great fights, and we're always, this guy fought everybody. There was so many fights, blah 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 blah. And, the style of the fighters and how they weren't afraid to fight anybody. Well, Marvin Johnson came along at a time when that was starting to change a little bit. But his era, and towards the end, I would say right around the end of his career, maybe even a couple of years before, like maybe when he regained his fight, his title in his first fight with Leslie Stewart, the whole game started changing, and this style, the Marvin Johnson, the Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, the Matthew Saad Muhammad, those style of fighters started to go away. And to be honest with you, we haven't seen them until Kovalev and Triple G have come around. They're very similar in style to Kovalev. People think of them as come at you and brawler type fighters, but these guys could box. They weren't just wild, crazy, barroom brawlers. Marvin Johnson, knew what he was doing. He just, like I said, his weakness was his own chin.
Yeah, and in a way, it's interesting because even though he's from Indianapolis, he sort of became a Philadelphia fighter. He sort of fought out. He ended up fighting out of Philadelphia. He was managed by Russell Peltz out of Philadelphia, and that was one of the reasons why he thought the Galindez fight was a more important fight for him. Looking back his whole career in that interview I mentioned, because he felt that, and it's funny because nowadays they probably would have made that fight marinate. But when he fought Matthew Saad Muhammad, he thought it was a little too soon in his career and would have liked to fight him later. And he thought one of the reasons why was because, and we see this a lot, Bill, when we talk about promoters, was that Russell Peltz had both guys. So there was no, it was a win-win for him to put them against each other. And he thought that, maybe they could have met later. And he would have could have been a win for him. But when you think about it, boxing fans won in the sense of seeing a fight of the year. But that it gives you another perspective, and it does tell you something about promoters. I thought to hear that.
Now, Marvin Johnson had, like you mentioned earlier, he had a very successful amateur career, winning a bronze medal in the '72 Olympics. He went on and had a successful professional career in boxing, three-time world light heavyweight champion. But I don't know what he did after boxing. He's 60 years old today. Do you know what he's doing now, what he got into after boxing? Can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, he's been works at a correction facility as works for the sheriff's department. And he supervises the inmate visitation, and he's been doing that, I guess, working in that system there for the state for about 20 years. So I guess he's doing well. And one of the things that was interesting is that he doesn't really have the greatest memories about boxing, because one of the things, and this is unfortunate, Bill, and maybe this is one of the reasons why we see so much of the squabbling of money about money we do today, is that one of the things that Johnson is sort of resentful about is that he never really he only once or twice in his last couple of fights did he make purses over $75,000. And even though some of the fights themselves were bigger, his cut was small. And that is one of those things that, when you watch that first Matthew Saad Muhammad fight, oh my God, to think a guy only got a $75,000 check for that. Oof.
Well, what's even more remarkable is that these fights had TV involved. Now it's like, you mentioned TV and that ups the purse, unless it's ESPN or something, because they don't really pay that much. But, cable networks and stuff, usually if you're fighting on a cable network, you're making a decent payday. Here's this guy, he fought on TV a lot and still didn't make any money.
Yeah, but evidently he did invest it well, and I guess he had some good advisors, so that's why he never needed to make a little short-lived comeback or something for money. It's the Marion County, Illinois Sheriff's Department.
Marion County, yeah, that's he's in Marion County Jail. I mean, they have some bad jails.
There's a lot of prisons there. Isn't that where the Blues Brothers were locked up?
Isn't that where Mike Tyson went?
It might be the same county, but wasn't he in a youth facility?
Yeah, he was. But you're right, the Blues Brothers came from there, too. But anyway, Marvin Johnson, who did you put him in with the title bout game?
Okay, so I put him in the title bout championship boxing game. I put him in against the guys that are top-ranked at BillyCBoxing.com. And so first we put him in against Kovalev. Against Kovalev, the first time they fought, Johnson stopped him, knocked him out in technical knockout in round 4. He had Stevenson down twice, 2:29 of round number 4. I then had them fight 100 times. Johnson comes out the winner, 63 wins, 36 defeats, 1 draw. He was able to stop Adonis 57 times. Stevenson stopped him 34 times. So if Stevenson was going to win, he usually won by knockout. Only 2 of his wins were decision wins.
No, wait a minute. You confused me. You first you said Kovalev. What happened with the Kovalev fight? You did 100 times with Kovalev?
No, this was. I'm sorry. Then I must have. I misspoke. Then that was 100 times with Stevenson.
Okay. Okay.
This was all. That was all Stevenson.
Okay.
The first time they fought, Johnson beats him by TKO in the 4th round. Then they fight 100 times. Johnson had 63 wins, 36 defeats, 1 draw, 57 KOs. Okay, here's Kovalev, who's number 2 ranked at BillyCBoxing.com. The first time they fought, Kovalev wins a first-round knockout. 2 minutes and 2 seconds, he stops Johnson. They fight a second time. Johnson wins in an 8th round TKO. Johnson was dropped once, and Sergey was dropped once in that fight. I had them fight a third time, and the third one was the best of the 3. Johnson had been down twice in the 1st and the 8th round, and then he put Kovalev down twice in the 11th and ends up winning at 133 of the 11th round by knockout. I then had them fight 100 times, and Marvin Johnson came out ahead, 74 wins, 25 defeats, 1 draw. He scored 62 knockouts. Of Kovalev's 25 wins, 22 of them were KOs. And finally, I put him in against B-Hop, who you have ranked 3rd. And the first time they fought, Johnson wins by unanimous decision. He did put B-Hop down once, but it was a lopsided fight, 117-111, 116-113, and 116-112, all in favor of Marvin Johnson. Then they fought 100 times. Of the 100, Johnson comes out 55 wins, 39 defeats, 6 draws. He was able to stop B-Hop 15 times, and Hopkins, of his wins, was able to stop Johnson 19 times.
Interesting. You know, a lot of times the results of the Title Bout Championship computer game come out the way I would think they would. You know, and Marvin Johnson, I mean, yeah, Kovalev's a power puncher, and B-Hop's defensively, by today's standards, one of the best in the game and all of this. But, Marvin Johnson, there's not many fighters like Johnson anymore, and, it's interesting to see the results because we know all the data's in that game, and I don't know. I think I agree with it. Plus, especially with this, with these simulations that you're doing, it kind of falls into place with Marvin Johnson. Most of his losses were knockout losses, just like his losses in his regular career were all knockouts.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think definitely the 3 fights with Kovalev, the way he gets a quick knockout in the first fight, and then he wins by knockout the second time, and then it's a knockdown drag out the third time. Yeah, I thought that the game did a pretty good job with that this week.
Yeah, no, that's good. Good job. Marvin Johnson, former world light heavyweight champion, first to become the world light heavyweight champion 3 times. His career record, 43 wins, 35 coming by knockout. He did have 6 losses in which he was stopped 5 times. He had a 72.5-inch reach. You said he was listed at 6 foot. I had him listed at 5'10.5", so it's probably maybe 5'11.5". I don't know.
Right.
282 rounds as a pro with a 71% knockout ratio. Marvin Johnson, our blast from the past this week. Good job as usual, Alex. A couple of things I wanted to get your thoughts. I know we talked a little.